Good afternoon, folks. We'll be starting in just a few moments here. It is 12, but I want to give time for folks to trickle in. Hope everyone's having a good Thursday and a good week so far. Still a few folks are coming in. I'll give it another moment or two, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, looks like the numbers kind of stabilized, so I'll go ahead and kick us off. Hello and welcome everyone to our Gimmal Education Series. This is where we explore ways to enhance your expertise with your Gimmal software. My name is Victor Rout from our customer success team, and I'll be your host. And joining me today is Jeff Dunning, Director of Sales Engineer and our subject matter expert. We're happy to have you with us, whether you'll be joining us live or watching the recording later. In today's session, we'll be discussing why rule-based retention works better for records managers and how to implement it. To make the best of today's session, here are a few housekeeping items. Our session will run for about 30 minutes, including time at the end for Q&A. Your questions are welcome and encouraged. The best way to ask them is to submit them anytime in the Q&A panel. You can find that located at the bottom of your Zoom window. I'll collect them for Jeff to answer after his presentation. And lastly, the session is being recorded and will be shared after the event via email and will be found on our YouTube channel. Jeff, you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate our newest Gimmal All-Stars. Participation in our education series has earned them all enough points to make their Gimmal All-Star badge. Congratulations to Tracy, Nung, RJ, and Marquita. Thanks for being a great part of our community. And to kick off our session, we'd like to start with a question. You should be seeing a question on your screen now. What percentage of your company employees are familiar with its retention schedule? I'll leave this open for a bit. All right. Looks like results are kind of slowing. Looks like leading right now is less than 25%. Hopefully you'll get a lot out of today's session then. Jeff, that's it for me. Feel free to take it away.
Thanks, Victor, and thanks for answering that question. That less than 25% is where we kind of would expect things to fall. I think it's really interesting to see the number of responses that are 51 to 75. I think that's a changing parameter in this talk here, but really kind of, the challenge, right? The challenge is really users don't really know that retention time frame. I call it the just in case dilemma, right? Someone says, "Oh gosh, I have this piece of content. I need to keep this just in case." And they keep it permanently. And then the business comes back and says, "You know what? We just got nailed. Why do we even have that document? Hasn't been opened in 15 years." And the end of the story there is just oops, right? The just in case dilemma, keep it permanently, because just in case is really not a record category. And I think that's really what the problem is how do we get away from really that over retention? Um, how do we get away from just the inaccuracies? And we'll talk a little bit more about this, right? I think the key as we talk through this is more of our users. If I took that same poll question and I said, how many of your users know what kind of content they're creating at any point in time? I think that number would be close to 100%, right? Like the user knows what they're creating. The user knows that I'm creating an HR policy. Now we just have to tell the user, oh, when you have an HR policy, do X with it. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about here a little bit. So what is the problem in the space, right? I think for me, like over retention, under retention, legal expo, like we've all heard that those conversations. We don't, I think with this group, we really don't have to talk too much about that. For me, um, there's really two things that kind of really pop out here. And the first one is inconsistency. And it's especially important today, right? When we are inconsistent in what we do, in the data we keep and the data we identify as records and all this other kind of stuff, it's the data starting to play a role in business decisions, right? We're starting to use this data that we're kind of keeping for whatever reason because we believe it's a record. It's playing a role in business decisions. It's playing a role in artificial intelligence, in AI, in Gen AI, right? And more activities within an organization. So I think that inconsistency has a broader kind of exposure to organizations today than it once did. Yeah, we've had regulatory issues, we've had, legal exposure and clutter and those kind of things. But now we're having this problem where we could be making decisions on quote unquote bad data. We could be sharing quote unquote data we don't want to share. And then it's also that inefficiency, right? We're all busy. Everybody's busy these days. Asking users to manage records is it just becomes a burden. And it's just adding work where we really don't need to add work, and that becomes a problem. And adding work is not something that end users are like excited about doing. And then it just puts more pressure on that inconsistency because now we don't want to do it. So we're probably not going to do it right. We're going to do it something that just makes it simple to get it out of the way. Inconsistency comes more. And then we look at things like AI and business decisions and all that stuff we're using data for, and the problem kind of compounds itself. So for me, we do have clutter, compliance, legal exposure, but some of these other things are becoming a little bit more important and more driving factors in the space. Why do the rules work? The rules work for a couple different reasons. It's automation and its scalability. And I think those are kind of the two areas that we see when we kind of look at how we and how those rules help us, right? When we could start automating, it takes that burden off the end users. So automation gives us that reduction of burden, and the end users aren't kind of just making things inconsistent. We get consistency, and that consistency builds trust around all the IG practices we're working, right? So automation builds consistency. Consistency is important for a lot of the things we're doing, right? And then the ability to scale, right? So the ability to kind of start someplace, start in the HR department and scale that to a finance department or scale that to an R&D department and scale it accordingly, right? So once we have the structures in place, the processes, the workflows, and how we're going to kind of do that. We're going to talk more about that as we get in. But once we have those things, we can start to scale it. Once people in an organization see it working someplace, they're more open to that kind of being deployed into their department, right? So we get that scalability across the space. Automation and consistency aligns with legal, regulatory, all that type of stuff. We reduce errors, all that kind of stuff. We get rid of the quote unquote just in case dilemma, right? We're not keeping stuff just in case, right? And I think that trust accordingly is really important, right? We start to build that organizational trust in the things we're doing. They trust that we're not going to delete the stuff that's important. They trust the AI results because it's used on data that's properly managed, right? We kind of get all the stuff and it starts building that trust pyramid within an organization. And now what we're doing becomes important and paramount to other things that are important to the business decisions, AI, all that kind of stuff, right? When we get all the benefits that we've been trying to get to for years around legal, regulatory compliance, we start to get all those benefits. And really, all we're going to ask, as you see here in a little bit, is all we're going to ask users to do is kind of say, hey, this is X, and I need to do, and this is how I go about creating or saving X. And then everything else behind it kind of happens accordingly. Right. So that's kind of the problem and why this kind of helps. And I really think it's about automation right? And then that whole scalability problem. So how do we make it happen? It's got to be easy, right? It's the keep it simple factor. And I think where we go wrong a lot of times is in this area right here is it's not simple, right? When something is not simple, when we don't make it easy for the end users, for me, I always say like if it's not easy, end user's going to do it once, they're going to do it the first time, and they're just never going to do it again, right? And that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for a one-time kind of solution here. We want something that users are going to say, hey, like I can do this. Um, I've been doing this for a really long time, and most organizations, you walk around and talk to people in the business, they all want to do what's right for the organization. Like they want to do the right thing. People are not by default looking to circumvent the rules. They're looking to do what the organization is asking them to do as long as it's doable within the context of their job, right? If it's too hard, they're like, yeah, I want to do this, but I just can't get this done. I can't do this every time. I'm never going to get my work done, right? So that's kind of the important thing to do is if we keep it simple and concise and say, hey, do just this is what you just have to do, then and it fits into their daily job, then they're going to do it. More often than not, they're going to do it. Very few people are looking to do, something that's not within, the organizational kind of parameters, right? And then the other important type is we really need to figure out the data sources that we're going to use for the records in our schedule, right? And I think this is important. Up front, you say, okay, this kind of data is going to exist in this particular data source. Maybe it's in our email, maybe it's in our SharePoint. We keep it in file shares, whatever the case might be, right? So we have a simple schedule, and that schedule gets mapped to data sources, and there could be more than one depending on where you are in an organization. If it's global, it might be different globally, like all that type of stuff. But we got to understand what's data sources we have because the data sources are really going to drive what the capabilities you have to perform the actions, right? So different data sources have different capabilities. We're going to see like content types or metadata or input templates, and some just going to give us file shares and things like that. So we have to understand the data source, so the capabilities behind it. So when we start looking at information architecture and those kind of things, we know the capabilities we have to do it, and then we could scale accordingly. We can say, hey, here's our process for what we're going to do in SharePoint Online, and then we just scale that for all the different schedules, all the different record categories that are going to exist in that data source. It becomes scalable there. We take the easiest first. We're going to keep it simple. What are the easy things? What's the low-hanging fruit? We all need to stop thinking about all the exception use cases in everything we do in IG. I think that's the biggest thing from a overall IG. Now I'm getting on my soapbox a little bit. Overall IG, we're always looking at the exceptions, the hardest use case, and we should always be looking for the low-hanging fruit, the simplest use cases. Get some momentum before you go tackling the tough stuff. For whatever reason, we always tend to say, yeah, but what about this? And that becomes like this small exception use case, and we spend 4 months spinning our wheels on this simple use case, and we get nothing else done. Keep it simple, find the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to step off my soapbox, get back on topic here real quick. So how do we make this happen? I mean, that's kind of what we're all kind of talking about here. So the first thing is we need to understand that the content creator knows the content type, meaning that they know what they're creating. They don't have to know how long do I need to keep this? Is there an event associated with it? Like all those different things. We're not asking them to know that. We're saying, what are you creating? Are you creating, excuse me, are you creating a HR policy? Are you creating an R&D document? Like what kind of document are you creating? So that's the first thing is that's what we're going to ask users to do. We're going to stick in this. What kind of content do you have? Because the end user, they know what they're creating. And then there's really two kind of pillars to make it happen. Now, there's two pillars. There's a lot of options in kind of each space, right? But with all the new kind of repositories and all the new kind of technology available to us, especially in the cloud, but even some of the on-prem stuff, we really have this ability to start looking at um, choosing content types when we save stuff. These are some SharePoint screens that I'm using here, but this works in like the Box and the Dropbox of the worlds. There's a lot of different places we can do it in our enterprise content management systems, a lot of different places where we can do this. But we can just have content types. Very simply, the end user says, I am creating a resume, or I just received a resume and I need to save it. When I go to save it, I choose resume. By default, that content type is going to ask for a couple pieces of information. The end user is done. I have a resume. I know the person's name, whatever it is, right? Boom, boom. I fill it out. The person is done. It's saved. Now they know exactly where to go find it, okay? Because they have a content type. They can search by content type. It goes to a specific place. They have some metadata to search by, and then we can control the retention, the records management of that very simply by saying, if it's content type resume, here's what we do with it. Simple. The user doesn't have to think about it. This is really kind of changing that whole space pretty quickly. The ability to choose content types, the ability to choose to add metadata, stuff like that. This is a simple process. Again, content creator says, I'm creating a resume. We say, just choose resume, follow the directions, hit save. You're done. Doesn't have to do much. The second kind of motion is kind of using locations. We've been doing this for years, right? We've been doing folder structures and file shares. We've been doing it forever. We can still do it. Again, this is a SharePoint screen. We still have that ability to do this in SharePoint and all those cloud systems as choose a destination for the piece of content, do it in file shares. Just say, hey, when you're creating an HR policy, it goes in this folder. Or when we can create a workflow that says when you, HR manager, approve a HR policy for publish, part of that workflow says you move it to this folder. Now it's in this folder. We kind of have a date it was published. It's in that folder. We could declare it a record. We can do stuff like that just from a location. Again, the end user, all the end user has to know, all we have to train them on is when you create an HR policy, save it here. And they're done, right? We're not asking them to make any grand decisions on any kind of content. So it really comes down to kind of what's changing. And really, we've been doing this for forever. Like we all know that we've had these, kind of extreme file folder structures in our file shares and all these kind of multiple levels of where we save stuff and things like that. We can continue to do that in the file share world. I would always say kind of like, can we simplify it a little bit? Does it have to be 7 levels? Do we have to have like all this kind of stuff? Because we kind of got to the point where we would use folder names as metadata, right? We would have it's kind of like HR policy, US, Ohio and payroll and like so each one of those folders become quote unquote a piece of metadata. So we have the ability to find this stuff later. Continue to do that, shorten it up, kind of do that stuff. File shares are a little bit harder in this world because we don't have a lot of the new kind of stuff that we get delivered in the cloud. The cool part is in the cloud, we have things like pick list, and you can just go pick the folder. I choose a folder. I really don't know where that folder is. It could be anywhere. It could be 7 levels down. I can present whatever I want. I call it a name, and it's kind of like um, it just goes in a location that you want to, right? And Todd, thanks for the question. But when I'm talking about workflow, really like a document management workflow, not like the record disposition workflow. The record disposition workflow is more kind of once we identified it, once we find it in the folder and we declare it, it has a workflow. When I say workflow, in a lot of our tools with SharePoint, a lot of the cloud-based repository tools, you can have these small workflows. You can say, hey, when someone says, when this field in there says approved, there could be a background workflow that says I move it from this draft folder to a published folder, and it sits in that published folder, and that's where it gets declared a record. And that's just like a simple workflow in the background. There's more complex stuff. I can create an HR document, save it, and then a workflow kick off, and it'll send an email to my manager who says, oh, you need to approve this. When they approve it, it moves on, that kind of stuff. So more of a document management workflow versus a life cycle kind of workflow. But great question there. So and so information architecture is really where the space lives. And if we take the time to define it, and this is where it gets scalable, right? I define a content type, say resume. This is how it kind of works, and everything's in the background. Then I say, okay, like HR, what's another piece of content you create? Oh, I create an offer letter. Boom. I just created that. I can copy that content type off. Now I have offer letter one. I have two of them done, right? And we're kind of moving on and kind of cranking there as we go through, and it just becomes scalable. And then I could take that same process somewhere else. If it's a file structure, we're just kind of matching those file structures. So it does take a little bit of work to upfront to get there. It's the same work we used to do creating those long, crazy file folder chains to get all that metadata out of us. Same concepts there, but it just simplifies that process. And the important thing is we get our consistency, we get some automation, and then we can start using this data, and we get a better feel for our data as we get into those other topics like AI and business decisions and how we're kind of using our data. So just touch the surface there. There's a lot more to the whole conversation around information architecture, but this is how we all should be thinking about managing our electronic content versus trying to force users into knowing how long do I keep something? Do I have to put a particular label on it? Do I have to declare it? Like get away from, some of the tools out there that allowed you to say, oh, I'm sitting in my email and I click the button and I have to choose the category and it labels it and then it becomes a record and those kind of things. Like get away from that, get away from that just in case dilemma. I'm sure we've all dealt with it. Like, hey, why'd you declare that a record? Well, I didn't know how else to save it, so I just figured I'd save it forever and um not a good thing, right? That's it. So just touching, just like scratching the surface, more to come. If you're interested in these concepts and things like that, we can do a little bit more there. But for the sake of time, Victor, I'm going to pass that over back to you, see if there's any more questions to be answered. Um, we'll go from there.
Sure, and thank you so much, Jeff. We had some really great questions come in. Let me check the Q&A here. Here's one. So most of our records are still in file shares, and there's no content type or metadata. How do we do that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there, right? One is we continue with our folder structures and put it in a particular folder on the way. I would say like again, I go back to that simplification, the consistency. If we didn't have to have it so big, not use kind of all the different folders to define a bunch of metadata, there's kind of one thing, one kind of way there. The other way to do it is there's tools out there now that will help classify data in file shares. Gimmal does have a tool, Discover, that'll do that classification and kind of overlays the metadata on top of content. So then, you can use something like a Discover that'll overlay that metadata on that content and file shares, which then the records program can kind of pick up. So there's kind of two options there. Homegrowners continue to use those file folder kind of names, maybe file names themselves, put some information in the file name. Again, it's the method of saying I'm creating an HR policy. If you create an HR policy, always start your file name with HR policy. Maybe that's kind of like a simple way to do that.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I also want to encourage folks to put their questions in the Q&A. I do have another one. Does this also work across repositories like Box?
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, I think the where we're all going, most organizations are right heading to the cloud, and all those cloud repositories, whether it be Box or uh, Dropbox, and of course all the stuff in the 365 stack, allow you to have things like content types and metadata and simple workflows kind of built in. So that functionality is there, and it really makes it a lot easier to start to define your kind of quote unquote information architecture. And the other side of this thing, like we probably didn't even touch on it, and it's outside the IG realm, but it really starts to add to efficiencies. Like people begin to know where to find stuff. Things, I call it the findability kind of aspects of all this, but findability becomes a lot easier when I could say, go find a resume for Jeff Dunning, and boom, it pops up, right? Like, boom, how kind of cool is that? I'm not searching. One of the reasons we have so much clutter these days, and again, my soapbox a little bit, reason we
Mhm.
have so much clutter these days is because people can't find stuff they previously created because there's so much stuff. So they just recreate it. We're recreating stuff over and over and over again, and we're not reusing what we have because we just don't have a way to find it. So it helps with some of those inefficiencies when you have a proper information architecture as well. Off my soapbox there.
Awesome. Thank you. We're looking good on time. If there are any lingering questions, feel free to drop them. Otherwise, that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you all for joining us. If you found today's webinar helpful, we'd love to hear your feedback. Look for a short survey link in your inbox shortly. And then also, we'd love to hear your plans for any events we'll be heading to. I will share a poll question that you should now be seeing across your screen. Also, Jeff, if you want to go back to your slides,
Did you?
is there one with the education schedule on it? There we
Yeah,
go.
is it not?
There we go. I see it now.
Okay,
Maybe it was a me thing and not a you thing.
cool.
But at any rate, here's our upcoming schedule for the remainder of the year. Registration emails will be going out very soon, so keep an eye on your inbox. And until next time, let us know if you have any ideas for future sessions or have questions on how Gimmo can help you. We'd love to hear it. Thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks all.